It's terribly difficult. So classify polynomial just means you're going to name it. And that's by the degree and the number of terms. That's going to be that little chart you see down there. And then the add, subtract, and write in standard form. We're going to mostly do that on the back. So just in general, a monomial is what we would call maybe just a single term. So it can be a plain number, it could be a variable, or it could be the product, so multiplication of variables and numbers, and it can have, specifically it says here, whole number exponents. We don't have like an exponent that would be 1/2 or something like that. We'll do that second semester. Those are called rational functions. So a whole number exponent. So just like an example, I'll just make something up. Like just a plain number, like 3 would be a monomial. A variable, like let's say I just had just a plain x, that could be a monomial, or maybe something a little more complicated. Let's say I had, I don't know, like 5x squared. That could be a monomial. It's probably what you guys would think of as a term. They're kind of interchangeable. And then a polynomial is just a bunch of monomials. They say in the definition that it's the sum or the difference. It can be adding or subtracting between them. So it can just be a monomial by itself, so a single term, or it can be multiple terms that are separated by addition and subtraction. Okay, so this guy right here is just a little example. So I've got 2x cubed minus 5x squared minus 2x, and then plus 5. Sorry, that plus sign didn't look wonderful. This is written in standard form. Does anybody know what it means for a polynomial? How do I know it's in standard form? What are you looking for if you know it's in standard form? Do you know? Yes, okay. So biggest exponent, and then to smallest in terms of the order. If you have just a plain number, just a constant term, that would go on the end. So like my powers of x, biggest exponent to small. So it's like x cubed, then x squared, then just a plain x, and then a 5. You don't have to have all the powers. It'll depend on the polynomial, but they do have to go in order, and it would always end with a plain number if you have a constant term. Okay, and then just to give you a little identification, the term that has the highest power of x is called the leading term, but specifically the number in front of it, like I got 2x cubed here, is called the leading coefficient. That's going to be a little bit more important when we start doing some graphing and things like that. But that first term is called the leading term, and if it has a number in front of it, that's called your leading coefficient. All right, and then the terms they each label just with some of the names. If it's a third power, it's cubic. If it's squared, we just got done with a whole unit on it, that's quadratic. If it's just a plain x, that's a linear, and if it's a plain number, it's a constant. Okay, now this particular polynomial would be classified as cubic because the highest power of x is to the third power. This has 4 terms, and we're going to talk about how to name them in this little example right here. Good morning. Okay, so degree and number of terms are the 2 things we're going to label based on. So the degree is just the highest power of the variable. And so if you don't have a variable, like I just literally wrote the number 10, this would be considered degree 0. Okay, so the name using the degree, this you guys hopefully are familiar with it, this would be called a constant. And I just have one term, just the 10. And the name using the number of terms, that's that word at the top, it's called a monomial. I think I spelled that right. Okay, so it'd be called a constant monomial if I were labeling this. All right, now the rest of these, some of these I think you're going to know and some of them you might not. So how many, or what would you tell me the degree is for if I have 2x plus 9? Carter, what do you think? Just 1. Okay, now this guy would be called, because it's just an x, it would be called linear. So that would actually be a line. If I put y equals 2x plus 9, we put that on the graph, that'd be linear. How many terms do I have there? 2. All right, does anybody know what it's called if it has 2 terms? Yeah, okay. So if I were labeling this, if this is my answer, you don't have to write the degree and number of terms in terms of the 1 and the 2 there, but you would just write that that's a linear binomial. Okay. My degree, it's not based on the coefficient, it's the highest power of x. So the highest power of x in this next one is a 2. And this guy, this is our whole unit we just got done with. This would be quadratic. How many terms does that one have? 3. All right, the 4x squared is a term, the 3x is a term. They're just subtracted or separated by addition or subtraction. So this is 3. Do we know the name for this? Trino. Okay, you guys know these. Okay, now the next one. Highest power of the variable, not the coefficient in front of it. So the highest power of x here is 3. So this would be 3rd degree. This is called cubic. And that was similar to the example above the little table. Now I have 4 terms here. We don't have any special names that we use beyond 3. So if your polynomial has like 4 terms or 5 terms, I'm just going to kind of abbreviate this. I'll just call it a polynomial, and I'm just going to write poly of 4 terms. So no special names beyond 3. So if you've got 4 terms, you can just say it's a polynomial of 4 terms or a polynomial with 4 terms. So either way is completely fine. If you had 5 terms, I'd say a polynomial with 5 terms or a polynomial of 5 terms. All right, now I don't know that we've talked about these at all. The highest power here is 4. Does anybody know what a 4th degree polynomial is called? I don't know if you guys would have ever seen that before. It looks similar to quadratic. It's called quartic. And the way I remember that is there's 4 quarters in a dollar. So I think 4th power is quartic. It kind of looks like the word quarter. I just have 1 term there. I just have that 5x to the 4th. So this is the monomial again. So this would be a quartic monomial is what I would label that as. And my last guy is to the 5th power. Does anybody know what the 5th power is called? I think I heard someone say this is called quintic. We're not going to go beyond 5. Most of the time I wouldn't go to 5. Most of the time they only go to 4 in terms of what we will do in this class. But if you have a 5th power, it's called quintic. This guy has 3 terms, so this would be a trinomial again. So the quintic trinomial is that last example. So those are all the names that you might run into for labels on these. And we're just going to practice using these terms today. So my first example, none of these are in standard form. So we're just going to rewrite them in standard form. So that just means the highest power of x has to come first. We're going to reorganize these, and then we're going to try to label them based on the names that we had up at the top. So how would I have to write 9 plus, just raise your hand and tell me, how would I have to write 9 plus x so it would be in standard form? X plus 9. Okay, what would I call this if I labeled it by the degree and number of terms? What would you call it? Perfect, linear binomial. That's it, perfect. Okay, how would you have to reorganize x cubed minus 2x squared minus 3x to the 4th? How would I have to reorganize that so it was written in standard form?
Go ahead. X squared plus x to the third power minus 3x.
We got to put the highest power of x first. We got to put the 4th power has to go first. Don't look at the coefficient. So we're just going to go negative 3x to the 4th, and just take the sign that's right in front of it. So you don't look at the coefficient, you'll look at the power of x when you move the terms around. So the 4 has to go first, and then I've got an x cubed, and that there's nothing in front of it, so I'm going to go ahead and we can assume that that's positive then. So I'm going to put a plus x cubed, and then the negative 2x squared, that has a negative in front of it, so we would write that as minus 2x squared. Who can tell me what I would call this one? Of those lovely list of names up there, what would you call this one by degree and number of terms? Molly, what do you think? Perfect. Quartic. And we got 3 terms, trinomial. All right, who can reorganize that last one for me so it's in standard form? I've got 4x minus 6x squared and then plus 7. How would you reorganize it?
Negative 6x squared plus 4x plus 7.
Perfect. Okay, what will we call this last one? Carter, what do you think? Perfect. Quadratic, because you've got x squared, and then trinomial. Is anybody having a question? Okay, now I know we're gonna flip to the back, so try to remember those names if you can. I should have written them up on the board so you can look at them. But what we're gonna do on the back here is some kind of simplification. I'm gonna start with these first two questions are just addition and subtraction, and then we'll do a little bit of distributive property, a little bit of multiplication. So just kind of all kinds of different algebraic operations with these polynomials. So if you're adding polynomials, this is not terrible. Especially if they don't have anything in front of the parentheses, I would literally you can just drop the parentheses. You don't need the parentheses if you're adding. If I add things together, it wouldn't change any of the terms in terms of like what the sign is or anything like that. So if it's a positive term, it's going to stay positive. If it's negative, it's going to stay negative. So if you're adding, and you don't have to rewrite it, but you could literally just drop the parentheses. Okay, how would I add these together? Like how many x squareds do I have? We have two terms with x squared, but how many total, like if I actually added them? Perfect. All right, you don't change the exponents when you're adding or subtracting. You're just adding or subtracting the coefficients. So I got an 8x squared, 5x squared, that's 13x squared. Okay, now how many x's do I have? 0. These, it's a little weird. They actually cancel out because I have a positive 6x and a negative 6x. So no x. That's okay. You don't have to have every term represented. All right, what would my constant term be here if I combine like terms? It would be -3, so this would be -6. So after I add those together, I end up with 13x squared minus 6. Can anybody remember from the front? Like, what would you call this? Yes, quadratic, because you got x squared, and then I've got two terms there, so it's a binomial. Now, subtraction I always think is much trickier. So if you're subtracting something, this first set of parentheses has nothing in front of it. So I'm just going to drop the parentheses and just kind of copy down the 6x to the fourth, 4x squared, and then minus 1. If you are subtracting, and especially like on this question, sorry, this is not folded very well, you have to distribute the subtraction to all the terms that you're subtracting. So in that polynomial, I'm subtracting both of those terms. Most people usually get the first one right. It's the second or maybe third or fourth one that they'll screw up because they don't distribute. Just distribute the subtraction like a little -1. It's just going to change the sign. So this would be minus 2x squared, and then minus a -3 would really turn into plus 3. After you do that, distribute that little subtraction sign, then combine like terms just like we did when we added. So who can simplify this for me? Like, what would I start out with? Huh.
6x to the 4 plus 2x squared plus
2x. Perfect, perfect. Okay, nothing to combine the 6x to the fourth with, right? Just that was the only term. You've got a 4x squared minus 2x squared. That's how she got 2x squared. And you got -1 and 3. That's going to give you the 2. And then on these today, like all those are divisible by 2, right? Don't be tempted to factor anything. We're going to write everything in standard form, so that means we don't want any parentheses. So don't go, oh, all those are divisible by 2. That's true, but don't factor anything today. We're just going to write everything in standard form. What would I call this one? Eli, what do you think? Perfect, quartic, and you got 3 terms, so trinomial. All right, is anybody having a question about the adding and subtracting? Okay, we're going to get a little tiny bit more complicated here. With these questions, though, I'm going to do a little distributive property. So we might review, well, a couple properties of exponents here. On this first question, I don't have anything in front of the parentheses, so I'm just going to drop the parentheses there and just copy that down. And then I'm going to distribute, I'm adding 2x times the polynomial that follows there. So I'm going to ask you, see if you guys remember. If I take 2x and I'm going to multiply that by all those terms, but specifically, if I just multiply it by 5x squared, what does that become? Like, what do I do with the numbers? What do I do with the exponents, or do I change them? Yes, good. Okay, just multiply your numbers, so that'd be 10. Add the exponents on the variables that are the same. So this is x to the first. They don't write a first power on that. But I've got 1 here, 2 more here, so you would have x to the third when you multiply that. What am I going to get if I do 2x times negative 3x? What do you think? Yes, ma'am. Negative 6x squared. Okay, you can always multiply. You can only add or subtract if you have like terms, but you can always multiply terms together no matter what. And then if I do the 2x times the negative 3, that would end up just being negative 6x. Once you do the distributive property there, we're just going to combine like terms. So I'm going to try and start with my highest power of x. I only have one term that has an x to the third, so that's got to go first for standard form. So this would be 10x cubed. Okay, I'm going to grab my marker. You don't have to do this. All right, I've got an 8x squared and a minus 6x squared. So we got to put those guys together. So that should be plus 2x squared. And then, oh, this is kind of like, did I use the same numbers? Oh, I did. Sort of similar. Okay, the 6x's cancel out here. 6x and negative 6x cancel each other out. And then I have a minus 3. All right. What would I call this one? What's the third power called? Remember? Cubic. Yep, cubic trinomial. Third power and 3 terms. Cubic trinomial. Okay. So, similar question, but we're subtracting on this one. All right, so I'm just going to, I don't have anything in front of the parentheses on that first polynomial, that 6x to the fourth minus 4x minus 1. So I'm just going to drop the parentheses. Now, this I am subtracting, but I'm distributing negative 4x squared. So just think about that as going through as a negative 4. If I take negative 4x squared times 2x squared, what would that become? Perfect. Negative 8x, 2 and 2 adds up to 4. All right, and then negative 4x squared times negative 1, negative times negative turns into a positive, so that would be plus 4x squared. Now, oh, this one's kind of weird too. I've got a 4x squared and a negative 4x squared, so those will cancel out. If I'm going to write this in standard form, the highest power of x goes first, so that would be the x to the fourth. I've got 6 here minus 8 here, so it would be negative 2x to the fourth, and then minus 1. Do you guys remember what the fourth degree was called from the front? Quartic, yeah. 4 quarters and $1. There's quartic, and there's 2 terms here, so binomial. All right, why don't you guys see if you can do, just try letter C there for me, and then we'll do the last 2 are multiplication. We'll go through those. Just see if you can do that letter C. Just full distributive property, we're subtracting, and we're going to combine that. When we get done today, the homework is super similar to what we're doing on the notes. So feel free to use that little chart as a reference for those names. I got 15x squared plus 8x. Does that sound good? Is that what you guys got? Okay. And it doesn't, I feel like on several of these questions, it doesn't always happen that terms cancel out. Like my constants canceled out there. I had a 10 and a net. That doesn't always happen. So just as you're doing the homework, that doesn't always happen when you're doing this. I don't want you to think that. This guy would be quadratic, and then this is a binomial. And again, like it's so tempting, I feel like, on these questions. Like I'm like, oh, both of these are divisible by x, and I just immediately want to pull an x out in front. Don't factor any of them. We're just going to leave them in standard form today. Okay, now, my last 2. Have you guys ever multiplied this would be a binomial because it's got two terms, and I'm going to multiply it by a trinomial. Have you guys done a problem like this before? Do we know how to do it? Like, how do I multiply? Similar to FOIL, but not quite. Like, what do you do if I'm going to multiply? I got 6x minus 5, and I want to take that times 3x squared plus 4x minus 2. Exactly. This works like a FOIL. Or if you like a box, you can draw a box for these. I'll draw a box and show you. But this, I call this basically FOIL on steroids. You're going to multiply 6x by all three of these. And then you're going to multiply -5 by all three of these. If you're a person that likes to draw a box, please feel free to do that. Just do it like a 2x3 box, and then you can organize it that way. If you're a little bit more into like a FOIL, I just want to show you a little trick that a teacher showed me a long time ago that I think is awesome. But anyway, I just go through and I multiply that first term 6x by all three of these. So I'm just going to do that real quick. So multiply your numbers, add the exponents on the variables that are the same. That first term would be 18x to the third. 6x times 4x would give you 24x squared. And then 6x times -2 would be -12x. Okay, now this is what that teacher showed me that I think is cool. So when I go through and multiply everybody by -5, I just line the like terms up underneath each other, like vertically. So I'm just going to show this to you. So if I do -5 times 3x squared, right, that's going to be -15x squared. So I just write it underneath the other term that has the x squared. So, and I'm going to add these vertically. If I do -5 times 4x, that's -20x. And if I do -5 times -2, that's +10. And that just makes it a little bit easier to combine like terms. So there's only one x cubed, just 18x cubed. Keep that by itself. 24 minus 15 is going to give you 9x squared. -12 and -20, we're going to get more negatives, so it'd be -32x. And then there's only one plain number, which is the 10, so nothing to combine that with. And you absolutely don't have to use that. I thought that was kind of a cool way to combine like terms when you stack them right by each other. It makes it a little bit easier. Okay, now I have one more problem, and this one is going to be a little bit weird. We're actually going to get into this a little bit more in the later part of this unit. But you're going to see a bunch of terms cancel out when you do this question, so don't think you're doing anything wrong. This is actually called a sum of cubes, which I know you don't know what that means yet, but we're going to work on it. All right, so if I do x times x squared, I get x cubed. Oh, wait, stop. I didn't label this last one. Sorry. This guy would be a cubic, and then this has 4 terms. So I'm just going to abbreviate the word polynomial, and I'm going to say a cubic polynomial of 4 terms. Or you can say with 4 terms. Either one of those is correct. My fault. So if it's got more than 3, it doesn't have a special name for the number of terms. So I'm just saying polynomial of however many terms it is. Sorry, I totally forgot. Okay, back to this one. All right, we're going to get x cubed. X times -5x would be -5x squared, and x times 25 is 25x. And then again, if I'm doing a problem like this, I just line them up vertically. So when I go through and multiply everybody by 5, I'm just going to line up the like terms. So 5 times x squared would be 5x squared. 5 times -5x would be -25x. And then 5 times 25, you could grab your calculator. I just happen to know what that is. It's 125. And this cool part of this guy is both of these are going to cancel each other out. And you're going to get x cubed plus 125. The other terms all cancel there. So this guy, highest power is 3, so this would be cubic. And then I got 2 terms, so binomial for the name. Is anybody having a question?